Sam Cooper, my brother, we are back in action. You're exhausted, you're tired, you're worn out. The news cycle, we're a month into 2026 and everything's going bonkers. I'm sure you haven't been able to peel yourself away from your laptop. So we'll keep this simple today.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's we said before. I think 2026 is going to move very fast, and it is. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, it's been a wild time. And I think a lot of us are trying to make sense of the things that are happening in the world around us, which is why Sam Cooper, sir, you are here with me today. So I want to start by talking about this alleged coup attempt in China. This is something that's kind of, I guess, gone largely unnoticed in Western media. There's been a few write ups on it, but nobody's really talking about it. I, however, have been paying very close attention because, of course, it is, well, critical to our new apparent trade partnership.
Mhm.
So, Sam, break it down for us. What happened in China? What was the plan or the plot to dethrone Xi Jinping, and what's the true story? What are the common misconceptions that are floating around in what has been talked about it in Western media, and what actually happened as far as you can tell?
Yeah, I'll give you the backstory on why I'm lucky to have good insight on this, and it's because a former U.S. official who speaks Mandarin and has deep knowledge of China's politics reached out to me a couple of years ago after reading my book on how China is devastating Canada through hybrid warfare. And his name is Chris Meyer. He writes on Substack at Wide Fountain. And long story short, we've been doing podcasts for over a year, sort of talking about the Vancouver model and the hybrid warfare that you and I experienced firsthand.
Yeah.
He read that story and he was like, wow, as a US official and a business person in the South Pacific and all those islands that China is trying to island hop to, they're doing the same thing over there, sending like casino gangsters over,
Yeah.
sending thousands of people to skew elections, in favor. We've talked before. Could it be true that China weaponizes migration? And yeah, we were right. Chris Meyer says we're right. Now, a senior former Pentagon official I've written a story about confirms this. But to get to the point, this guy, Chris Meyer, knows as much as anyone how to read the tea leaves in China. So we've been talking for over a year about how sort of diaspora sources and experts have been saying Xi Jinping he's the biggest dictator since Mao, but he's fragile. Like his military doesn't respect him. There have been suspected coup attempts before that you'll never read about in the Western media. So jump to the chase now. I mean, 2 weeks ago on the weekend, the news breaks that the senior leader of the Central Military Commission, which is 7 PLA leaders with Xi Jinping at the top, these are the people that decide what the PLA can and can't do around the world. And the news breaks that General Jian has been purged or thrown in jail, potentially with his family, because Xi Jinping has decided to basically in that body of 7, there's only 2 people left. General Xi and the other guy who's in charge of anti-corruption. They've taken out the most respected real soldier of the PLA. And so, reports are going back and forth. The Wall Street Journal reported that this guy, this respected general, who the US officials, by the way, when they go over there, insist on talking to, he's the Wall Street Journal reports that he's been leaking nuclear secrets, which China experts looked at that and said that's basically impossible and unbelievable. And the story from the Wall Street Journal was sourced from anonymous Chinese Communist Party and military official sources. So Chris, I, and others have sort of deconstructed that report and said there's no way that happened. That looks like Xi's propaganda to tar this guy that he wants to take out as a potential rival for his leadership. And the further backstory is there's reports from diaspora sources that there may have been a shootout between this general's inner cadre and Xi Jinping's inner guard. All that's unverified.
Yeah.
But, this has all been going on over the past 2 weeks in China. And the most plausible story that I would say myself and other experts believe is this General John, was taken down because he didn't agree that the PLA could take Taiwan by 2027, which is what President Xi has demanded. So it looks like the military is in complete turmoil. We don't know if rolling sort of coup and counter coup situations are happening in Beijing. Reports came out just the other day that another of these senior general types has reportedly committed suicide. And so, again, the China experts look at that and say, suicide? No, he was likely suicided by President Xi. So, all to say, when you sift it all out, I mean, no expert can deny that there's major upheaval within the PLA, and it looks like because the experts in these high level military bodies know that the PLA is not ready to take over, the Indo-Pacific as she wants. And so it looks like sweeping people out of the way to put more yes men in place. So the situation is increasingly volatile. China sure does have a lot of arms and it wants to knock the US out of the top spot. But, the real military people inside there know that they don't have the experience and the capacity, certainly at this point, to do that. So I think that's what's going on in China.
Yeah. What's interesting about this story to me is that it very closely resembles a lot of other stories of previous dictators. Since Hitler is the only point of reference anybody in the Western world understands, I'll use Hitler as the example. Hitler routinely purged the top generals from the Nazi party during his time as the supreme leader of Nazi Germany, to a point where at the end of World War II, he didn't have any competent uh, generals anymore. And that was a lot of what led to Germany losing the Second World War, was that he had purged so many of his competent officers from his military that he was left with nothing. He was appointing random,
Yeah.
infantrymen to, field marshal positions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And before that, politicians and, propagandists, when there's military training is good for a reason. You learn how to actually move armies around and logistics. And, politicians and propagandists don't naturally take to that type of different career right away.
Right, exactly. And so what's happening right now in China appears to be very similar. And this also mirrors another episode that happened during Mao's time, when there was a mutiny that formed within the CCP. And Mao, that was what launched the Cultural Revolution, because Mao mobilized the youth of China to take back control from the inner members of his circle who were trying to wrestle power away from him. Now, the question here is that, so you have this general Zhang Yusha, who is clearly the more competent of them all. Obviously, the guy that anybody who knows what they're talking about when they're dealing with China, that's the guy they want to go to. They want to leapfrog Xi Jinping and go straight to Zhang Yusha. And it appears like this guy might be kind of like the de facto leader in China. And now with him gone, what does that mean for China as a nation? And not only that, but say, for example, countries like Canada, who are turning to China to lean on in replacement for the United States.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like there's been commentary on Keir Starmer's trip to China, which is like a mirror image of Mark Carney's trip. But people have been making fun that, in his tour of the Forbidden City, he's there with some, looks like a mid-level tour guide. It's Keir Starmer and some Chinese guy in the middle, just looking silly. And you see, like, in comparison, Donald Trump and Melania Trump and she and his wife looking all grand in that same picture. But another way to look at it, I thought, and I don't know, it's like maybe the security situation was such that, she and his
Yeah.
family couldn't be out there with Keir Starmer. And I think that just goes to your point about, what happens. It's indisputable that Mark Carney was marching into Beijing, and we've all seen the Liberal Party pre-election, clips of Mark Carney marching down in front of the ranks, inspecting the soldiers, which just makes
Right.
me laugh because we now know in the background potentially there's this coup going on between the real power of the military, General Sean, and Xi. And so Mark Carney, now that we know, he's just over there looking silly, right? And just like Keir Starmer, who are you really dealing with?
Yeah.
How good is your foreign policy intelligence, CSIS, MI6, or more likely, Keir Starmer and Mark Carney aren't listening? We know Justin Trudeau didn't listen to CSIS when they told him about, traveling over to India and we need to be careful with encouraging, terror network, blah, blah, blah. As I reported for the Bureau, Justin Trudeau ignored CSIS's, foreign policy advice. He ignored everything because it was all about securing trade deals. Carbon copy. Mark Carney's going over there, and as I say, looking like a damn fool now because we know there was major turmoil going on, and he's, as I say, I can't stop laughing when I think of the clips of Mark Carney inspecting the military ranks, looking like the regal little central banker that he is. But it's foolishness, right? We know that the military was in a massive turmoil behind the scenes. So, I mean, just silly propaganda.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I don't know, the timing in all this is very coincidental, as World Economic Forum, that big circle jerk happens. Sorry, Miss Cooper. And Mark Carney gives his big speech about the middle powers needing to unite
Yeah.
and find an alternative to the United States, which obviously is China. So basically, trying to rally the middle powers behind China. China giving their speech, their presentation, the VP there, basically reiterating everything Mark Carney said. And then Donald Trump, who, let's face it, rambled for like 2 hours, but did say, I would say Howard Lutnick gave the more powerful, sent a more powerful message when he was on his panel, basically saying, look, we're America first. That's what this means. Globalism has failed. This is a total disaster. And we're not following you guys into the black hole, was essentially his message. And so, you have this rallying cry from Mark Carney, of all people, the Prime Minister of Canada, attempting to pull together the middle powers and put them into China's shadow, follow China into the future. And now you have this instability in China, which is, it's impossible to ignore. There's obviously something happening within the CCP involving the PLA that is, who knows how this is going to turn out. So, Sam, what does that mean for us with all of our bravado and everything that we, did in the last few months in terms of ratcheting up our relationship with China, all of the, I want to say all of the mean things that Canadian press and the Liberals have put out there about Trump and his administration. Where does that leave us? Are we in a situation now where we have to eat our words and go back and grovel to the United States and beg for forgiveness? Because that's what it's really looking like to me.
I mean, I don't like the situation of Canada being powerless, but it's like, we are, just admit it, like stop getting all bent out of shape when people with more power around the world tell you what you are.
Yeah.
Okay, let's work on correcting it. But the Liberal Party of Canada way is, to gaslight and get all passive aggressive. And Mark Carney with his speech, what did I think of that? I saw like fellow journalists, from the New York Times to, of course, across Canada, even some analysts that I respect saying, "Oh, what a brilliant speech! He really nailed the moment of now, and he's speaking to what." But there's nothing behind it. And
Yeah.
as we now know, even Keir Starmer asked, "Are you going to be on board with this rallying with Mark Carney?" And he said, "No, I have my own British common sense way." It reminded me very much of when the Canadian media was all hot and bothered when in Justin Trudeau's early days, and they were doing stories, which I'm sure came from the Prime Minister's office about, oh, Macron, are you going to try to copy Trudeau's brand? And they're like, no. Or there was
like
another one like a few
like
years
he's the
later.
model or something, you know?
No, and there was another one, another PMO, I'm sure, created narrative where they tried to rebrand Trudeau as the dean of the G7 because he was the only one that had been in power for like 5 or 6 years. Everyone else gone, like, Boris is gone, everyone. And no, it's just silliness, right? You're not a leading middle power. You're barely a middle power. And the speech meant nothing. There's no substance to it. It had its intended effect that you and I know and we've spoken of a psyop for the coming election to get, his base all riled up, to get the New York Times all riled up. And people in Canada love it
Yeah.
when the New York Times or the Washington Post will be, oh, Mark Carney could be the new anti-Trump world, right? That just gives them that kind of Jon Stewart, Mark Carney interview juice. It's just like it's a repeating cycle going on and on. So, and
Yeah.
I'm sure, you probably appreciated that Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who I would think that either he or Marco Rubio are number two. One of them is, but after President Trump, those are the two to watch in that administration. And as I'm sure you saw with CNBC, he pointed to that speech and said, I think he was just virtue signaling to his globalist buddies over in Switzerland. There's no substance to it. It sounds like electioneering. He ran a very anti American prior campaign, and he looks like he's setting that up again. And I think that's the only way to look at it, beyond the fact that, again, he is laundering China's favored narrative of the world. How do I know this? I reported like a little notice story on the Bureau in the last little while of a well-respected sort of social media analytics firm that showed that Chinese media and major Chinese influencer accounts on X, Facebook, etc., were all taking little clips of Mark Carney's, bon mots and nice sayings over in Beijing and turning them into Chinese propaganda, which is
Yeah.
the exact same thing they're doing with the speech in Davos. I would think the same thing they're doing with now Premier David Eby's kind of statements. And yeah, I think I've gone around the horn enough times that there's nothing to that speech. It's like blow it. It's like grass in the wind, right? It will not mean anything except to his election chances in Canada.
Now, yeah, I completely agree with you, Sam. But the question is how much of this anti-American sentiment that keeps coming from our prime minister, his political party, and our state-funded media, how much is it damaging our relationship with the United States?
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, another kind of story that broke on the day of Mark Carney's speech in Switzerland was the Globe and Mail had a front page story about how Canada has some war plan to defend if in case the United States invaded Canada. And of course, any military in the world will have an outside kind of plan, even if something goes wrong with an ally. But the nature of the plan and the way it was published on the front page of the Globe and Mail, in my view, to quite obviously sort of, frame whatever President Trump was saying in Greenland with, how excited the Canadian base of Mark Carney is about, the next election, etc. It was just, to me, a ridiculous story. And so one of my sort of expert contributors, Ian Bradbury, from a national security background, sort of wrote an op-ed and deconstructed how Trump's rhetoric is transient. Anyone smart in the world now knows that a lot of the stuff he says is theatrical. It's part of his negotiating style. It's part of his personality that I don't think he can control. It's part of just his political domestic, narrative.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that the United States will ever attack Canada. And yet, for Mark Carney, Globe and Mail editorials about let's go nuclear, talking about all kinds of things that Canada could never do in the next 20 years. Yeah, it is damaging relations with Washington. And it makes Canada look foolish. How do I know they care? I mean, I was told that they were reading my, so people in the White House were reading my contributors' deconstruction of why the Globe and Mail story was silly, and furthermore, actually what Canada should be doing
Yeah.
in conjunction with our natural allies to take care of the gaps that we've left in our north. So, I mean, I think we could tell this story in 1,000 different ways, but I haven't seen anything from Mark Carney yet that he has a good positive plan to deal with the rhetoric from Donald Trump, which won't stop, which will always be, offensive, and yet that doesn't mean that the American state isn't going in a direction, and will continue going in a direction. And underlying Trump's rhetoric, that's where they're going. Like, and if you can't see that, even as a Canadian voter, if you can't educate yourself about that, you're not going to have a good framework around rational decision making when you go to the polls.
And what's concerning about this all to me is that, the fascist rhetoric continues, right? This whole Trump as Hitler thing, which seems to be an inverse of reality, right? Like, if anybody on this planet right now represents Hitlerian style totalitarianism, it's China and the CCP. And you have the Western middle powers now attempting to align themselves with China, which, of course, Trump and his administration are really just a pretext. Because if you look at Trump's requests of the Western middle powers, they're very simple, right? Like, especially with Canada, put some money into your armed forces, help us in the Arctic, close down your border, stop letting terrorists come into our country, and stop bringing fentanyl in, and don't tariff our stuff, and we can talk. And, it's like, I get that the theatrics of Trump kind of tend to make the whole situation a little more murky and
They do, yeah.
tend to push people to the extremes. But if you're an intelligent person and you just look at the situation for what it is, without the theatrics involved, the United States has a very strong argument for what they're asking. And really all they're trying to do is isolate the American continent and get the European powers and the North American nations in line and unified, right?
Yeah, they're not huge asks. And maybe I could even say I'm a little biased because I wrote a book about it. And if the asks or the recommendations I was making in my book, like have a racketeering law, take your immigration laws and your deportation laws seriously, in a sensitive way, but seriously. Stop with the fentanyl. China is your enemy. Don't mince words on that. Money laundering. It's ravaging, whole generations now. Do something about it. Don't let don't let the worst criminals in the world use your banks in your cities like weapons. It's not rocket science. And I was saying it years ago, and nothing has happened. This is why I say I get it. I wouldn't want to be on the opposite side of dealing with someone that's calling me governor or saying, maybe we should annex, even though I knew he was joking. If I was Mark Carney, I'd say, he's got his style. I don't believe that he means that. I don't think he can even help himself. He has a domestic base, and yet I respect the strength behind him. And I respect that the US state, if it doesn't see security improvements that are tangible, will go into Mexico. And we know this. They will go in kinetically into Mexico if certain politicians are not convicted for their cartel ties. I just read a good paper from a US think tank on this. And so that's the reality. And as you and I have talked about, I don't think Canada is all that much better than Mexico. It's certainly going in that cartel infiltrated and China controlled or influenced direction.
Yeah.
And this is why I say, like, it's kind of hard to get people to get their mind away from the carnival barker, destroying, rhetoric of President Donald Trump, and realize that this is the direction of the US state and people, not just Republicans, not just MAGA, right? It's across the board. And so, yeah, they're not huge asks, and they should have been done a long time ago. So again, if I'm a leader, I'm trying to convey that to my constituency that yeah, it hurts, and we'll find a way to deal with this offensive rhetoric later. But we've got some real work to do, and Canada's not doing that.
No, and this is like a recurring theme through through all of our discussions, right? Because again, I think it's that people get caught up in the theatrics of Trump. You know, I mean,
Totally.
his speech or presentation at the World Economic Forum was a really good example. He talked for 2 hours, and he just rattled off economic stats, and then he went on this weird side quest. You know, ripping apart Biden, calling him Sleepy Jonah, like in front of a global audience, you know, people who really aren't interested or don't care in that rhetoric, in listening to that rhetoric. Then he goes off and throws some jabs at Carney. Then he returns back to the economy, right? Like if Trump has an Achilles heel, it's his ability to articulate his policy and the things that his government are doing. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
if you took Trump's policy and you packaged it in Barack Obama, you'd have a pretty damn good president,
it's a
right?
great that's quite a point because Barack Obama with that cool logical style combined with where the US state is now about getting very serious as we've talked about the break, the sprint towards a potential war. Yeah, that would be quite the combination rather than the sort of free associating kind of like off the cuff rap that President Trump does at times.
Right. And, you know, and the irony here is that Trump and his administration are actually doing a lot of what Obama claimed he was going to do or promised he would do and didn't actually accomplish. Right. And so it's like, I guess it's like you can't have it all, right? You know, you have this president who's very imperfect, but is doing a lot of really incredible things around the world. And so, Sam, that brings me to the next point here is that, you know, we have the Arctic. Greenland is pretty much a done deal. I know that they have some sort of defense agreement now. Now you have the Canadian Arctic. And, you know, I've been saying this in a lot of different conversations with other people, but my message has been that the United States is not going to walk away from the Arctic. There's no way, no how. That now is got to be the point of focus for them geopolitically. So, what does that mean for us, Sam? We've Mark Carney has created these new deals with China, which, by the way, and we'll talk about this as well, will allow Chinese media access to our country. And the way I framed it, and Sam, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it would give them access to like freedom of information documents that say somebody like yourself has access to, which is a huge intelligence, you know, just a huge, it just compromises us hugely. And then you also have a law enforcement aspect, which is equally concerning because Canada is pushing through censorship laws and hate speech laws that would definitely, absolutely target people like me and you. And when I was listening to or reading about this, uh, you're the first person who came to mind because I'm sure there are elements within the CCP that would love to get their hands on you. And if we have an agreement or a relationship with China that involves a law enforcement aspect, it is totally feasible in the future that you could be seen as having broken certain hate speech laws in your reporting on China and potentially extradited to China to face charges. I mean, have you thought about that at all, Sam?
I mean, as far as I go on that is I've already faced threats for operating on our soil and had to, as I've told you and others, harden my own defenses. And so I put myself I've been told I can't travel to China, so that's already an issue. We know that China is trying to say that people in Taiwan are subject to their national security law as secessionists, even though to you and me, Taiwan is its own country. There are now people in Taiwan that have to worry about where they're going to fly around the world and whether someone will honor a completely bogus extradition request, right? I talked to the ambassador of Taiwan, who I have a good relationship with in Ottawa, and he said, "Yeah, you might have to worry about something like that." So yeah, the China absolutely and across the world is trying to use that type of lawfare. And so with a government that's giving them, the media access and the law enforcement access, sure, I and probably more importantly, the people in the diaspora are terrified. It makes no sense. And China before was, I would say, leveraging Canadian politicians and police to get access to Canadian police databases, which is a very live story that I can't report, in detail, but should impact some very important people in Canada out on the western side. Instead of having traders inside certain governments in Canada doing that searches of police databases for China, China has state level agreements where their police have interaction with Canadian police. And as my contributor, Gary Clement, 50-year veteran of the Mounties, who has worked as an international police liaison, says, giving China that kind of system level access allows them to reverse engineer how our police work. So of course it'll give them, give them so many pieces of system wide intelligence. The visibility, the infiltration, the saturation is beyond scary. And so yeah, I feel for myself, I think of certain things, the hate speech, I've already told you that the people that I say strongly, some of them surrounding Premier David Eby, are involved in media entities and suggested, this came up in my book, Willful Blindness 2021, when I reported on how China was stealing our PPE during the pandemic through their United Front groups. I got backlash at myself and my then employer that I was involved in hate speech and should face some sort of prosecution, criminal. And I've told you before that I believe that these same entities surrounding David Eby, Chinese journalists, I've read in their, I'll just call them fake CCP, media outlets. Rise Media is the name of one. They've written how if you vote for Justin Trudeau, in 2021, he's promised to bring forward the Online Hate Act in 100 days. So to me, that just shows you, you don't even have to speculate at what they're up to. CCP spies are already saying that's what they want the government to do. So again, we could list off another 1,000 examples of concrete examples of how we were talking last year about how we assessed. I think we both did that. It seemed that Justin Trudeau was pretty bad, but Mark Carney may even accelerate things towards China worse, and he has. It's not speculation anymore.
And so now we have this situation, Sam, where you have an unstable communist empire unto itself, right?
Yeah.
That I've been hearing rumblings from other China dissidents that their economy is collapsing as well. We know that their population is shrinking at a rapid pace because of their one child policy that they had instituted in the past. So it seems like they are a quickly falling apart. Now, with Canada, we find ourselves in the middle of these dueling empires, this Cold War that is on the verge of turning hot. And what I see happening with China now is that they are desperately trying to reach further into the middle powers, and nowhere is that more evident than in Canada and possibly the UK.
Britain. Yeah.
Yeah, and so as China is trying to gain more and more access in Canada, there's also the matter of there was I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a mining company that was sold to China, a gold mining company for $5 billion, right? So now they own more of that industry. Yeah. 5 billion. I might be off on that number, but
it's around there, and I think
it's in that neighborhood. Yeah.
So or something like that.
So what it looks like to me is you're seeing kind of like the death throes of the communist Chinese empire. But as they try to reach further and further into Canada, the United States is going to have to move faster and faster to intercept. And you have this issue of the Arctic that the United States has to gain control over. They have to secure it. And that's not just for their interests, like Canadians watching this. This is for our interests as well. This is our protection as well. This isn't just for them. I mean, if anything, it's actually more for us because we would be directly in the path of any ballistic missiles coming across from nuclear subs outside of the Arctic coast. So, Sam, what's your assessment here? Because it looks like at least there was some form of coup attempt in China. We know that Xi Jinping is not exactly the most respected figure in the CCP, although he is the president and leader. And the United States has to secure the Arctic. How they're going to do that without Canada's help is anybody's guess. So, what do you think? What's your assessment? What do you see happening in the very near future?
Yeah, what I already see happening is China accelerating its United Front work department networks and corporate networks that had to go to ground a bit, largely due to my reporting or the focus on election interference. Uh, Even more largely, the kidnapping of the Michaels and the Mun Wanzhou affair, that did put a big spotlight on their operations in Canada. Um, our government tried to put a lid on it, the Liberal government, and you know, Carney's reelection completely halted that process. If the Conservatives, who were poised to win, had won, the process of taking care of cracking down more on China would be continuing. We'd be in a better position with the United States, but as we both know, that didn't happen for many reasons. And so I'm seeing signs absolutely that they not just Mark Carney at the state level, but the clandestine networks are now. I reported for the Bureau based on some great research from the Jamestown Foundation. They have what's called these pop-up police stations, or diplomats with proxies meeting in like gyms in Saskatchewan, or out in Nova Scotia, all around the country. They're very strong in the cities, as we know and as I exposed, but now they have like they're trying to offer services to small diasporas across the country and in the north, and they're accelerating that. This is proven data. People can go to the bureau.news and look at the pop-up police stations occurring in Canada, as they did in New York City. And so as to the Arctic, I already have. I've report. I'll give you two points here. I reported for the Bureau based on the NSI Cup 2019 leaked foreign interference report that I got exclusively, that CSIS said China has been targeting First Nations leaders in the North, bringing some of them over, for supposed will increase your tourism junkets to China, but targeting the ones that they thought could be corrupted or fooled. And the documents from CSIS even say this is, I believe the word's called Baypan, meaning it's just a fool's operation. They're bringing over First Nations leaders that they think can be fooled or fools, and they're trying to get their resources. So what does that mean? They're going to accelerate those operations in this Arctic that you're saying is so important, and I agree. They're going to, they're going to try, if they think that we're in a position to do critical mineral deals with the United States to improve our trade relations and get back to the table on the U.S. Mexico Canada deal. Quite possibly, they will try to get certain First Nations leaders to stand in the way of those operations. I have this already. I've cited a document that I reported on for that last piece. I have that on pretty good authority from international government sources that they think this is going on in Canada, with China using First Nations jurisdictions to get in the middle of, seizing resources or blocking allied resource trade.
I'm going to ask you a tough question here. I'm going to drag you down a rabbit hole for a second, okay?
Yeah.
What is the probability that this has all just been theater? And that, see, here's what I'm confused about, Sam, and maybe you can set me straight. Mark Carney's a globalist, and he has been for a very long time. He exists in the upper echelons of global finance, right? He's a Goldman Sachs guy, Brookfield, the UN, World Economic Forum. I mean, he's part of every villain group in the world, right? So there's no way that he could do what he has done over the last couple of months and not know what the consequences would be in terms of our relationship, Canada's relationship with China or with the United States. How much of this could potentially be just a smoke screen to divert attention away from what is already pretty much a foregone conclusion, which is some form of territorial union between Canada and the United States? And I mean beyond just sharing a border.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question when you consider that, there's already been reports, whether made and retracted, that, Canada will be part of this US Golden Dome, or, there will be military cooperation in the North in exchange for critical mineral deals. We already both know that the US is very motivated to secure their critical mineral supply chains. I believe within 2 years is the deadline they've given themselves for war reasons. So, I mean, it is a possibility that Mark Carney and the Liberals thought that they were going to play all sides and that they were going to get some sort of acceptable deal with Beijing that benefited their, the Liberal Party. Some think is just the political wing of some industrialists in, Montreal or Quebec, scattered elsewhere, in some Canadian cities, that they were going to get a good deal for the real bosses of the party, the business leaders, that was still acceptable to get a trade deal with the States. And then there's going to be what you point to, some deeper security integration. And I just don't have a full crystal ball on that one, because there's things that point to that, but there's other things that don't add up, that I think, that you couldn't even, if I'm really scrambling on this one, that would be a pretty smart play if you could pull it off. But to pull that off, you'd have to have control over the very strong China only wing within your party.
Yeah.
And you'd have to think that you had control over those industrialists in Quebec that I think are pretty much China only. I don't think there's very much of what's good for Canada in their thinking. So I really don't know. I mean, it's still up in the air, but at the end of the day, I think we both agree that, as I said, there's some people that think that the US could go kinetic in Mexico. And if they go kinetic in Mexico, that'll certainly have an impact on whatever is being discussed between Ottawa and Washington. So I really don't know.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question, Sam, is because in a lot of ways it just feels like we're being set up. Like the whole elbows up propaganda campaign that got Mark Carney elected, I feel in a lot of ways like it was manufactured in order to create some form of adversity, uh, or ill will towards the Americans that would drive us closer to China, which would provide pretext for the United States to do what it has to do economically and militarily, and eventually would lead to an amalgamation of some kind. I might be reading too far into it. It's just the thing that I don't understand, Sam, is that Mark Carney is way smarter than what he's doing. I'm a man of average intelligence. If you stuck me into any finance circles, I would probably bankrupt whatever fund I was a part of within 24 hours. And even I could tell you that this is a terrible, terrible predicament Mark Carney and the Liberal Party are putting Canada in. We share a 5,500-mile border with the world empire. Right? Like we're not getting away from them under any circumstances. There's just no chance. We're not watching.
Yeah, the best answer I have for you is, I could tell you this, that I could recently talk to someone pretty well connected up high in the White House, familiar with the people that that were laughing at and ridiculing Mark Carney's speech in Switzerland. And basically, what was conveyed to me is you know, the people were saying, like, who is Mark Carney working for? It doesn't make sense. And I said, well, I mean, you can't exactly prove this case in court, but I've reported a number of times on the Bureau that credible people say Canada's policy is set up in certain towards the world, and especially China, is set in certain business offices in Montreal. Right? There's people that have actually been told this in no
Yeah.
uncertain terms. So maybe it's a case where let's just go with Occam's razor that Mark Carney really is owned by certain, or owes a lot to certain corporate interests in Montreal. And it doesn't even have to go as far as Davos. It's right home in Montreal. These are the people, along with Jean Chrétien, going back to Pierre Trudeau, that have surrounded Canadian prime ministers. And maybe, you know, maybe they don't care that much about the rest of Canada. Maybe they think the rest of Canada isn't smart enough to see what they're up to. So that's a kind of a simple answer, but it could be the right answer if they're asking the question in the White House, and they've got the CIA at their beck and call. I would have thought that they had the answer, but people in Canada look at it this way, certain people.
That's a very good point. And I think that's maybe the part I was missing, because we often forget that there's a layer above these world leaders and politicians. And we got to look into that this week with the latest Epstein file dump,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is our last subject because you
right.
wrote a piece on it,
Yeah,
Sam. That was very illuminating.
yeah,
Now I'll just kind of give my perspective first because I went not through it, not like you, where I'm sitting in a cemetery reading 1,000 pages of classified documents. But I went through it, looked around, poked around, searched
yeah,
some keywords. And even more so now than it did before, it looks to me like Jeffrey Epstein was a league above the Mark Carneys and the Donald Trumps, and that these intelligence agencies that he was connected to and the world leaders that he was communicating with, and not only that, but the very powerful people in finance looked like they were working for him. So, Sam, you've had a chance to look through some of the documents. What's your takeaway?
yeah. I mean, the way you put that, it's a good way to put it. Like, I'm just going to, we've talked about this before, and I already had a theory which was only solidified by what came out. But, you know, uh, it was, as we've talked about, it's very clear that he has deep relationships with some people in Israeli intelligence and government. I had said that it was emerging that Russians were in the picture, obviously, China in the picture. Very clearly, he had to have some interaction with domestic agencies. And the old story is, the CIA knows whatever is going on, but they just watch. They watch and collect. The FBI, whose job it is to actually, bust people for various reasons, seem to be a little lower level power in a way than the CIA. So I don't have a theory for why they let this gangster and child rapist do what he did, right? I don't have a theory, but it is clear that in a way he was a facilitator and fixer for elites around the world. He was working for a lot of people were working for him. He kind of reminded, that movie The Talented Mr. Ripley. Like, his early story is coming from not that much wealth, but just frauding and hustling his way up into like being like a cabana boy for like wealthy families in Britain or worldwide, right? And he got to that level where he was a friend and a fixer to everyone. And an even more direct, evidence is coming out that, his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father was quite clearly working for both Israeli Russian intelligence and had, of course, some British intelligence ties because they want to know what's going on, and had that odd, suspicious death. It looks like Epstein rose in his fraud, brilliant, criminal minded way and inherited the Robert Maxwell network, which was about kind of money laundering for the Russians, gathering for the Israelis, I'm sure dealing with the Allies in some ways. And so just a few things that jumped out at me. The data came out that an email that Epstein emailed a Russian intelligence officer in 2015 and said, "There's this young girl from Moscow that's arrived in New York. She's trying to blackmail some businessmen. It's not good for business. Do you have some suggestions?" And there's been more reporting on it, but that quite clearly shows both the Russian organized crime businessmen, Russian intelligence ties, and an email back from that guy. Basically, I read a little file, and the guy said, "Few people can open up horizons and bring meetings like Jeffrey Epstein can." So yeah, he was, it looks like, his own sort of criminal entity connected to that. I would say there's sort of a long history, especially within the Russian Jewish community, of, some mafia ties for some of the people that were very close to the Russian intelligence services and moving money worldwide for the KGB, and kept doing it, have never stopped. And so Epstein sort of seems to fit into that world. And then, you know, the the child raping and the compromat, it all fits into all so many activities that he was doing and facilitating. There's a few other big things that jumped out at me. I mean, there was a Russian lady that's in Silicon Valley. Her name has come up in a lot of the files. Appears to have had a relationship with Putin in a youth wing of the Russian party, and now she's over in Silicon Valley, like stealing technology, and involved apparently in sort of the Epstein network. So again, China comes up, and a lot of this isn't verified, but there's just so many data points of those worldwide connections. And as you say, he could be a person that had intelligence agents working for him because he could deliver a lot.
That's what it looks like to me. It looks like, so what's conspicuous to me about this data dump is something you brought up earlier, in relation to the FBI. There are a lot of FBI complainant files included in that data dump, and I think they're in there purposely to divert attention away from what's really important.
Right. There's a
Right.
lot of nonsense in there.
Tons. And this is the thing, is like, you're seeing all this stuff surface online with these FBI complainant reports, right? Because you could be any crazy person in the world and call the FBI and have a story to tell, and
Totally.
they will document it and file it, right?
Yep.
So we're talking thousands and thousands of documents related to complaints made by anonymous sources, right? That, Jay-Z in 1996, and this and this and that, right? Like it's just thousands and thousands of documents, and that's what's drawing the attention. And so the real story here is being lost. And I think that's intentional, Sam. It has to be, because why else would they include those files in the data dump?
At least partly. And there's one thing I don't want to forget that I reported. Again, this is one of these documents where it could be a false flag, or, I reported it for a reason. We know that Mark Epstein, the brother, is on the record saying that, and here we're going to go into a rabbit hole, is on the record saying that he doesn't believe that his brother did take his life. He's one of those that believes that his brother knew too much. But there's a verified email from someone that reached out to Mark Epstein in Manhattan 2 days after Jeffrey Epstein's death. And I have to look at, the possibility that this could be real. But, he tells Mark, basically, your brother's life was a lot more complicated than you or most people know. It looked like he was working for the Israelis, but he was working also for enemies of Israel. He was getting a lot of people sort of to look badly at Israel. He made some mistakes, and you could be next. Ghislaine Maxwell could be next. Hey, let me tell you that your brother was actually working for Chinese and North Korean agents years ago in arms trading and money laundering. Or was it just arms trading? But the arms trading piece, like, there's a lot of, it looks like there's substance to that. It looks like there's substance to Jeffrey Epstein working with many different people, including in Asia. And why I'm saying this is, this document comes out, I'm on 3 million. and from an unidentified source that it's confirmed had contact with Mark Epstein, and it looked like a substantial conversation, and it all sort of kind of added to that, what I see as a growing hypothesis that this is a story, really, it's not just about the absolute egregious abuse of children and the American state turning its eye to that. It's about how elites worldwide, while the underlings worry about who's fighting who, or what party you believe in, at that level, they're just all, they're all helping themselves. And Jeffrey Epstein and others exist at that level that is above, above the law, above common economic principle, right? And
Yeah, it's the control grid.
yeah,
Right, like it's the control grid. Like when you're reading through those documents, like myself, I've been reading, and I bypass all the FBI complaint and stuff, because although it's salacious and horrific, a lot of what you're reading, you have to remember that these are just FBI complaints. Like we don't know if there were ever any investigations opened, if there was ever any follow-up, or if this was just somebody who called in and said, hey, I got, sorry, Miss Cooper, fingered by a unicorn on the island, in 2001. We don't know. But what's important here is that you're getting a bird's eye view into the control grid and how this all works. What's interesting is Mark Carney's name only appears once in the emails, and it's in reference to an investigation that had been opened against him and a few other people in finance. And those people saw it as being important enough to mention it in a communication to each other.
I saw that, and I don't know how to assess it, but it pointed to, was it a JP Morgan banker? And
Yeah.
Carney's name came up, and we don't know what's to that, but I'm glad you raised that, because look at what is the news breaking whenever breaking shortly after that data dump is that this guy Mandelson, the Lord Mandelson, the ambassador for Keir Starmer to America, it's now come out, who of course famously is on the front page of the British tabloids in his underwear in Epstein's mansion. But the real story is, emails show he was leaking information about British finances during the global economic crisis, giving Epstein the opportunity and Epstein's friends to profit on whatever chaos was going while being paid off. And he was essentially leaking intelligence from the UK to a guy that he well knew, is working with mafia, Russians, whatever, worldwide.
Right. And so what you're seeing is the way these power networks operate and the people who are involved. And what's fascinating is that you get to see their internal communications to each other. And Justin Trudeau is in those files as well, right? There's reference made to policy that they were trying to pass in Canada. So why is Jeffrey Epstein involved in policy creation and legislation in Canada? And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? They're talking, there's communications between him and others about creating offshore accounts for or offshore programs for vaccines. And there's what looked to be pandemic planning in the months and years, or in the years leading up to COVID-19. Like there's a lot there. And I feel like it's all getting lost within the salacious material. And that's why that stuff is there. And that's why I'm glad you exist, Sam Cooper, because we need guys like you to look past that stuff and read it, who have a take a journalistic approach, rather than me sitting in front of the galaxy speaking into a microphone.
It's a galaxy of connections to unwind, but I agree. It's the American public's absolute disgust that people have gotten away with child abuse, but the as big or as important a story is those networks of elites that are deciding what goes on in your economy without your any idea, right? And so I'm glad that part of the story is surfacing.
Absolutely. And listen, the truth is, I wrote today that if you follow the breadcrumbs on what's truly important, you will find those children along the way. Right. Like the child abuse story it's what draws people in, because it's so immoral and so depraved that, we want to, I guess all of us, just those of us who are empathetic and compassionate, want to learn as much about as we can about this and lock those people away forever. And as somebody who has covered child sex rings in the past as a columnist, I can tell you there's a lot of stuff that I'm reading, and even those FBI complaints documents that are very parallel to victim statements that I've read from people in the past who were abused as children as part of other networks, right? So
Yeah, I mean, this is. I've never had a real focus on that, but I do think it's a bigger problem than people realize, and so there will be compelling pieces that come out that judges won't be able to ignore. It reminds me of a conversation I had with someone that was focused on the criminal side of casino money laundering, and we were having a conversation, and the person said, well, one day we will get a politician on a wiretap and it will be so compelling that a Canadian judge simply will not be able to walk away from it. And the same sort of logic here.
yeah, um, Sam, I know you're tired, brother. I'm going to let you off the hook in a second
Yeah,
here.
right. Yeah.
Dude, I can only imagine what it must be like to be you right now. I mean, you're covering like 5 different beats all at the same time, and all of them are
And editing columns from great contributors as well.
right. So, yeah, I could only imagine how tired you are, Sam. So, we'll put a pin in it for now. I want to explore this China mutiny more
Yeah.
in the coming weeks, because there's a lot that we don't understand about the CCP. Even myself, like I understand quite a bit, but I know you know more. And I think that there's always been this inner struggle in the CCP between the hardliners like Xi Jinping and then the reformers or the moderates, people like Deng Xiaoping,
Hmm.
right? And I think we need to talk about that a little bit, because you said something very interesting in your conversation with Chris Meyer, which people watching this episode's over. Shut this shit off. Go over there and listen to it, because it's just packed with information. It's only half an hour long and it's incredible. But it's that there this struggle between Xi Jinping and the moderates and the reformers is once again playing out. It's something that flares up every now and then. And see, my question is if China loses Xi Jinping, is the replacement going to be much better? What replaces him? And what the statement was made, and I can't remember if it was yourself or Chris who said it, but it was that China or Canada foolishly aligned itself with Xi Jinping when those who were in the know knew that Zhang Yusha was the guy that you should be aligning yourself with.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's an amazing point. And to your question, will are there better leaders within the CCP? Yeah, there's better leaders. There's always a cleaner dirty shirt in the closet, right? My own personal belief is that at the end of the day, hopefully the CCP will evolve from better leaders to dissolving, and there will be democracy, God willing. But the point that I and Chris were making was U.S. officials and certain smarter officials around the world, when they were going over to Beijing, were insisting to meet with General Zhang. And I'm sure that, she and his inner cadre didn't like that, but they knew they couldn't. They're dealing with a power that wants to talk to the person that is really respected in the rest of the world. Mark Carney, even if he knew that, wouldn't have the power to make that ask, right?
Right.
Whereas Jake Sullivan in 2024, as I knew long time ago from a very well placed source in another country, made that request, And so Chris's point was she is already on thin ice the last year, and Mark Carney going over there and basically, playing the fool is only giving Xi face, as they say in China. It's hoisting him up. Even President Trump can be criticized for not taking a hard line so far in his second administration. Although I think there's some deep jujitsu going on there. Yeah, and so what's my bottom line on that? Mark Carney and Keir Starmer look stupid. Maybe they are, or maybe they just don't have the power to make the kind of ask that the U.S. government can when they go over there.
Yeah, I mean, Canada and the UK are standing in the forbidden city with a tour guide. It's basically where we are now.
That, and there was another great observation that uh, Keir Starmer was made to meet with something like the number five in power, a guy named Kai Key, who is the guy that, according to the British leaked intelligence reporting, was running the spy operation into Westminster in the case that Keir Starmer had to bend over and cancel. So some experts were saying they're rubbing it in his face. They made him shake hands with the guy who was running a spy operation into Britain, and Keir Starmer couldn't do anything about it or didn't have the backbone to do anything about it. So that is that.
Brother, I have never seen anybody less confident than Keir Starmer walking off a plane at a Beijing airport. He looked like he didn't know what he was doing or what was about to happen.
Yeah.
He looked like a 14-year-old at his first co-ed dance, you know? And it's humiliating, right? It's humiliating for the UK. It's humiliating for Mark Carney to go on stage at the World Economic Forum and say what he said, to go over to Beijing and to say, use the words in bold underlined new world order, which is really the only phrase that any, halfway conspiracy theorist on earth understands.
Latch onto, yeah.
Right? It's all so humiliating. And the thing that confuses me is how is this happening when we have an America to the south of us that is gaining strength and momentum as the months go by? Like how I don't understand. It's like we're picking the losing side when we like it's the 92 dream team versus like your little league
The
team.
bad news bears.
Yeah, the bad news bears, right? And we're just joining up with the bad. This is the part that's confusing me, Sam. And maybe we can explore this more in a later conversation. I just don't understand why they're doing what they're doing when really all Trump has basically handed us everything on a platter, given us terms that we should accept, will benefit Canada greatly and the UK and all the other Western powers. And yet here we are aligning ourselves with China. And I think maybe you're right, Sam. Maybe it is the corporate powers in Montreal that are guiding, that are steering this ship, and we're all just along for the ride.
That's the simplest answer, I think.
All right, Sam Cooper, my brother, I know you're tired. I'm going to let you off the hook. Before we get out of here, tell everyone where they can find you.
Go to the bureau.news and you're going to get a story or two every day. Two or three home runs per week. That's my promise.
Brother, you are putting up home runs every single fucking day. We haven't even talked about. Does everybody know that there were I don't know, are they Chinese nationals who were arrested at Western
Oh
University for
man,
building bombs? Anybody aware of that? No, we didn't even talk about it here because the world is so crazy right now that we didn't even cover it. But Sam did. It's all over the bureau. So
that
sign up.
story is not going to go away. I go to the bureau and read a few stories on that, and we'll talk about that next time because it's not going away.
I get all of the bureau direct to my inbox. If I could show you my inbox right now, it's the only thing I don't delete. I keep all of my bureau articles. They're all there, and I actually have a folder for them so that I can go
That
to
should be
them
an
and read them.
advertisement, just your inbox.
But guys, sign up at thebureau.news, but don't just sign up for free. Sign up as a paid subscriber. Sam is only able to do the work that he does because he is completely reader funded. So if you want balls to the wall, burn the boat, Sam Cooper, to keep doing his thing, to keep bringing truth and shining light on things that none of us know are going on, would know what was going on if not for him, sign up as a paid subscriber at thebureau.news. Also follow Sam on X at Scooper Cooper. I am a habitual refresher of his feed, and if you follow him, you will be too. Sam, can I drag you back into the
Yeah,
darkness in a few weeks?
most definitely.
All right, let's get out of here.
All right. Good night.